Can your own personality inspire the characters that you create? Hello, I'm Jason Inman, and this is Mythmakers, a writing podcast. My goal is to interview writers, actors, and creators on some of their favorite stories to dive deep and learn with you more about their storytelling process. I think how people contemplate their favorite movies and television gives us a mirror into their creative process, into how they make modern myths, if you will. Today's guest is Alex Segura. He's the author of the Pete Fernandez mystery novel series, writer of the Archies for Archie Comics, and he's the co-president of Archie Comics. So let's dive deep and talk about story. All right, Alex, thank you so much for joining me on Mythmakers.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, so before we get into your favorite character, your favorite book, comic, favorite movie, all those type of answers that we usually do, I want to ask you the question that I ask everybody. What's your writing process? Now, your writing process is a little bit different because I know you have a pretty important full-time job. Right. So what is your writing schedule, especially when you're working on some of your novels?
Man, it's tough. I mean, it's more like a writing philosophy, which is basically don't make it too ceremonial. I think a lot of writers, when they first get started, everything has to align for them to be in a mindset to write. You know, the sun has to be coming through the window in a certain way. You have to be wearing your favorite T-shirt, and you have to be in the music has to be playing, and that goes out the window. When life takes over, when you have a full-time job, or you have a kid, or you have family obligations and other stuff, and then you kind of pair that with your desire to write. You really dig out and just maximize the time you have. So, if I'm sitting around on a Saturday and the kid's asleep and I have 20 minutes, then I'll jam for 20 minutes and then also be prepared to stop at any time. You get a phone call, somebody comes by, what have you. Mm-hmm. But usually in terms of when, it's at night. It's usually actually right around now, like the kid's asleep, maybe my wife is working on something else, and I'm not at work, so I'm just kind of pecking away at whatever's top of the pile.
Now, how does your inspiration for writing some of your novels work, especially since you happen to write so many comic books at the same time, kind of during your day? Do you get to write during your day job?
No, because, not to get too in the weeds on it, but the stuff I do for Archie is kind of in addition to. So when I'm there in the office, I'm doing my executive stuff. So, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so you can't write an Archie Comics on the clock, even though you work for Archie Comics.
If I'm looking at a proof, I can tweak something, or
sure.
If need be, like if we're under duress. But my day job takes up so much of the time, I feel like I was blurring the lines a little bit.
Yeah. Now, your Pete Fernandez series, they are these sort of, would you call them noir?
I would say they're hard-boiled noir, PI fiction, crime fiction. It's so kind of interchangeable, but yeah, noir.
How long does it take you to finish one of those novels, since you are primarily doing it off the clock, if you will, as you say?
It's about a year. From soup to nuts, if you count the research time and you also include revision. And so from initial idea, like the time I open the document and it's completely blank, to the time I send the final draft to my editor, I would say it's about 10 months. And that's, the first draft will take me 5 or 6 months to get out the door. And that's the most arduous part, just finishing a draft. And then the rest is kind of fun. It's still, because you're revising, you're moving stuff around. I love adding stuff. When you feel like there's a hole, you can just, hey, I'm in charge of everything. I can just create the scene that connects these two pieces together, which is great. But yeah, I would say about a year, beginning to end. And, I have a book each year, so it's pretty tight, and I have to be pretty disciplined about it. So my answer when people say, how do you find the time, is I don't do anything else. I spend time with family, I go to work, we go on vacation every now and again, and I write because it's important to me and it's something I want to do. And I want to get better each time, so I don't ever want to get to that point where someone's like, "Whoa, man, his early stuff was so much better," because he's phoning it in. I want to improve each time, and so I try to challenge myself and make each book a step up.
That's interesting, and it's interesting that you say that you basically just don't. That's how your scheduling works. You don't do anything else, because I am impressed by your schedule, because you have released a lot of these P. Fernandez books. Like, and you seem like, from the outside, you seem like a writing locomotive that this train just never stops.
There's never a time when I get home and I'm like, I'm just going to watch a couple movies. I have absolutely nothing to do. Like, even tonight, like, I am going to watch a movie and relax, but I do have things I could be working on. And so it's a matter of just keeping the plate spinning, I guess. And luckily, nothing's gone completely off the rails. I mean, if I need more time, my editor at Polis, the publisher of the Peep books, is very understanding. And obviously, we have enough runway that we can figure out, hey, you know, maybe you won't hit April this year and we'll put it in May, or we'll put it in June, but it's still a book a year, so a month is not going to change everything if you're not working each day, you know?
Mm-hmm. Now, since you have a prose book out there and you have a regular prose book series, basically, I'm going to ask you the question that I'm certain a lot of our listeners want to know. How did you get this book? How did you get the first Peter Fernandez book published, or how did you get an agent? Like, what was the process of starting to get this book out there?
It's a good question. You know, fans of the Peep books will remember that Silent City, the first Peep book, came out in 2013, actually. It was published by this tiny publisher called Cadorus Press, and they did a lot of poetry books and literary stuff, and I knew the publisher, and at that point I felt like I'd been through the agent merry-go-round so many times. I'd submitted it to so many places that I'd just reached a point where I was like, I know this is good. I'm confident in this material. I want it to exist. And so I talked to my friend, this guy, Wayne Lockwood, and he said, we'll publish it. You know, I want to read it, and obviously I'll give you notes, but I think we'll put it out because I know it's going to be good. And so he read it and thumbs up, and it was approved. And, you know, it was a tiny print run. But it existed, and that was so valuable to me to have that book in my hand and look at it and see that all that work, like that blood, sweat, and tears, became an actual book. And even that was without an agent. And so that was exciting, and I did a ton of events and promoted it a lot, to the point where I almost used that book as my resume. You know, I passed it to editors, I handed it to other authors, I did a bunch of readings, and then I ended up getting an agent. Then the lady who would become my agent called me and said, hey, can I see a copy of your book? And I knew her kind of outside of agenting life. And so I thought she was just being polite. I thought she just wanted to read it, you know, like a friend asking you to read your book. And so I sent it to her. And then a few weeks later, I got an email. She said, I'd like to rep you, and I'd like to know what else you're working on. And so that kind of got the ball rolling in terms of a much bigger platform for the books. And at that point, we decided, you know, the print run and the exposure of the first book was, I mean, the footprint was pretty small. I mean, the print wasn't huge. So we thought, let's see if someone will reissue the first one and then have the whole series. And I'd already written another novel in the interim.
You'd already written book 2? Yeah,
I'd already written book 2. So, because once I finished book 1, I was like, I want to know what happens next. So I kept writing. I mean, I just kept going. And so at that point, I got in touch with Jason Pinter, who owns Polis Books. He's the founder and owner. And we sat down and chatted at BoucherCon, which is basically kind of like the San Diego Comic-Con of the mystery world. It's smaller. I mean, it's not huge and insane like San Diego, but that's usually like the marquee event of the Mystery Con season. And so I met up with him. I let him know, and he was aware of Silent City, which I was really proud to hear. Like, he liked the book.
Oh, wow, that's cool, man.
Yeah, he knew about it. And so I said, look, I have the rights, and I'd like to find a home for the whole series, because at that point I knew I wanted to step up and be with a publisher that had better distribution, had more of a framework, you know, could just get me out there more. And so, you know, after that, he and my agent talked it over, and it became a deal. And then we republished Silent City in 2016, and then right after we published Down the Darkest Street, which was the second book, which I had been sitting on. And then the next year, Dangerous Ends, and the year after that, Blackout. So then we had 4, which is crazy.
So would you recommend that to prose writers, that if they're going round and round not finding responses from agents, to reach out directly to publishers? Yeah, I mean, you have to trust your instinct, and you have to know how you have to make sure you're behaving professionally. Like, a lot of publishers won't talk to you without an agent, which is what it is. But there are smaller presses that will talk to you. There's a handful of
publishers I can name that do crime fiction that don't deal with agents. I mean, they will if you have one, but if you're an author and you just have a manuscript, they'll read it. They'll put it in the slush pile at least.
If you want to hear more of this podcast, you can hear the full episode over at patreon.com/Jawiin. That's Jawiin. My patrons are the whole reason that this dream podcast of mine happened. So head over there and become a patron if you want to hear the full podcast episode. Thanks for listening.